He spent 12 seasons in the National Football League, an all-pro defensive end by way of the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Beat Train, Bertrand Berry. And, Mike Grose. It's Train and Grose on the No Bull Podcast Network.
Welcome in another edition of Train and Grose. I'm Mike Grose alongside Bertrand Berry, and we're happy to join you. We actually adjusted our schedule so we could cover the national championship game, which was played last night, B. So lots to get to on today's edition of Train and Grose. And as always, follow us on Twitter at Train and Grose. Hey, B, super card weekend, high level before we get into the individual games. 3 games on Saturday, 3 games on Sunday, 6 games for the fans to enjoy. I thought, for me, as a casual fan, I enjoyed it. I loved the nonstop football. Began around 11 o'clock in the morning Arizona time all the way into the evening. I thought it was a great weekend of football.
I absolutely thought it was a great weekend, and I loved the storylines behind each game. And you had different plays that were controversial, and there's never going to be a perfect game, but I love the fact that there was so much drama behind each game. And for the most part, there weren't any blowouts. Most of them were pretty much competitive. So you didn't have any of those dog type games where you could stop watching at halftime. And I absolutely loved it. And I think the story that I walk away from feeling the best about is Lamar Jackson. Of all the quarterbacks in the playoffs, I think there was more pressure on him undeservedly, but I thought he answered a lot of criticism that came his way with that win out there in Tennessee.
Well, the other thing, too, and to the extent that you read into social media and you follow things, you look at it, the Ravens didn't get off to a good start on Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, their time in that game against the Titans. They were down 10-0. It looks like the Titans are going to roll. And you get out there and you hear the comments and you see some of the commentary around that, putting the pressure on the young man. And I don't know if it's, he's young, as I said, it's not redemption, but it's like, you got to give these guys room to work and operate. And, I think a lot of what was coming down is unfair. And when it mattered, he did it. And, you take a team on the road in the NFL and win a playoff game. That's it. That's the epitome for a starting quarterback. And
it is. And the thing that was so concerning about it, Mike, is the man is 24 years old.
Exactly.
He's actually younger than Joe Burrow, who's a rookie who they say has a lot of promise, and he's already accomplished what he's accomplished. And to say that if he had lost this game, he would have been tagged a guy that just can't get it done makes absolutely no sense. But I was happy for him. He was able to get a big-time win. And I thought most of the games went according to script as far as how I thought they would play out.
Yeah, there was no real, as you said, blowouts. I mean, with the exception of that Cleveland game and the Steelers, and I guess, tip of the cap to you. Last week when we were together, Sean and I think we were pretty adamant that the Steelers were going to win that one. But boy, the Browns came into Pittsburgh and they jumped on the Steelers and they didn't let them up. It came back a little bit in the second half, and maybe if you're a hardcore Cleveland fan, you're getting that feeling like, good, what's going to happen here? But man, the Browns made a statement. And I think at the same time, maybe not the statement they wanted to make, but the Steelers kind of made a statement as well.
They did make a statement. They said that they needed to blow this situation up and start over. It's time to rebuild in Steel City. And I know a lot of Steeler fans don't want to hear that, but from the very first play, you saw there was miscommunication, and that's pretty much been the microcosm of their last 6 weeks. They were 1-5 in those last 6 weeks, and the one game that they won, it took a Herculean effort just to win that game. And so I look at the Cleveland Browns, you give them all the credit in the world. No Kevin Stefanski on the sidelines and a few of their starters. And Baker Mayfield had to introduce himself to a guy that was actually blocking for him during the course of that game. So there were a lot of storylines. No Odell Beckham Jr. for the most part of the season. And this team continued to trudge ahead and make strides. And you have to be happy, because you don't want to see one team just be downtrodden year after year after year. You want every team to feel like at some point they're going to turn this thing around. And for the Cleveland Browns, it's finally happened. Hadn't been in the playoffs since 2002.
Hey, B, going back to the Steelers situation, it's going to be a long offseason with a lot of questions and a lot of work to be done there with a very, very proud franchise. And you look at it, And the things that really struck me, because this is the first time that I sat down and watched the Steelers game from beginning to end. I'm a red zone guy, right? I see the highlights and I see what's going on. But, to watch this team for a full 4 quarters, and when you think about Steelers football, you think about the ability to rush the football, and you think about a stout defense. You think about a defense that's not going to let anybody, I don't care about Baker Mayfield or rivalry, any of that. They're not going to let somebody roll into Pittsburgh and do what the Browns did to them on Sunday evening. And like I said, talk about Big Ben and his age and some of the play of the wide receivers, but the lack of a rushing attack and the lack of a defensive effort on Sunday night are the 2 things that really stuck out to me with the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Mike, I truly believe Ben Roethlisberger has played his last down as a Pittsburgh Steeler. With the salary cap number that he's going to demand and the fact that he threw the ball 68 times in that game, 68 times. If you cut that in half, 34 passes is a lot for one game. He threw 68 times in one game. Yeah, he got 500 yards, and yeah, he threw for a couple of touchdowns, but the interceptions, the 3 interceptions, and the fumble, the snap at the beginning of the game, that really set the tone for the entire game. And you can say what you want about all those empty yards. It's like those empty calories, eating those the snacks and stuff that we eat. But it really didn't matter too much because that game was really lost in that first quarter when it was 28-0. And nobody saw 28-0, but man, you could just tell the more physical team came from the guys wearing the orange helmets.
Lastly, before we get out of here, recapping last weekend, the NFC West, the Los Angeles Rams, a team that obviously here in Arizona, we saw eliminate the Cardinals a week ago from the postseason. They roll up into Seattle and they come away with a win. And they do it with, their new quarterback gets knocked out early. Fortunately for him, it looked serious at the time. The ambulance ride to the hospital, apparently it's just a stinger. So good news on that front. Jared Goff with the banged up thumb comes in. The numbers weren't impressive necessarily, but the only number that matters is that the Rams roll out of Seattle with a 30-20 win over the Seahawks. And again, that familiarity when you're playing a team for the 3rd time. Obviously, they split the regular season, but still, those division rivals know each other very well.
The one thing that I would say about the Los Angeles Rams, they remind me of the Baltimore Ravens in this respect. I think they do better when they're the underdog as opposed to being the team that's chased and hunted. And you look at how they performed, it was very, very impressive from a defensive front. Yeah, the offense didn't give them a whole lot, but they didn't need a whole lot because the defense really came to play. And you saw Russell Wilson unable to get comfortable at all at any point in that game, sacked 5 times. That's really unlike Russell Wilson. And I think to a degree, you have to look at the fall of the offense from the Seattle Seahawks from what they were at the beginning of the year to letting Russ cook to where now I'm not sure if he even had the opportunity to make a side dish or dessert when you start talking about the main entree, because it seemed like they tried to revert back to that placed out defense and let the running game try to win the game for the Seattle Seahawks. And that's an antiquated formula for them that I don't think is going to work. And they've got some real decisions to make up there in the Great Northwest.
Yeah, and DK Metcalf, we talked about the frustration we saw here on DeAndre Hopkins when things weren't going well against the Rams. And you look at that Rams defense, that Rams secondary, you take a star or a star in the making, DK Metcalf, and the frustration was so obvious, so visible on the TV. And they were talking about during the broadcast, man, he's going on the sideline, losing it, and the empty stadium in Seattle, the Rams can see that too. And once you get a player on the rope, it impacted the entire unit, I think, to a degree for the Seattle Seahawks.
I think you just give a lot of credit to the Rams. They came in and they really got after Russell Wilson. They did not allow him to get comfortable. And it's that old adage when you talk playoff football, Mike, you got to kill the head. And Russell Wilson is the head of that snake. And they were able to really keep him uncomfortable, get him on the ground, as we said, 5 times and hurry him a number of other times. So I thought their game plan was solid. Sean McVay continues to show why he's one of the young stars as far as coaches in the NFL. And I think Green Bay should look out because I think they match up well with them coming into this upcoming weekend.
Well, and you jump right to where I wanted to go. This coming weekend, you look at the games. And so Kansas City, Green Bay, they had the weekend off. The other thing you look at is location of these games. You're on the shores of Lake Erie with Buffalo. You're up in the frozen tundra of Lambeau Field. I looked at it, and the weather, and again, I'm not Royal Norman on Channel 3 or whatever, so I'm not going to get into deep predictions, but at least what it looks like, it's not terrible weather. It's going to be cold, no snow, but it's not below zero temperatures. We're talking mid-30s in Green Bay, mid-30s in Buffalo, and it looks like overcast but no precipitation for these games. So, if you're the Rams going to Green Bay, or if you're Baltimore going up to Buffalo, you got about as good as you could hope for, or good as you could expect from that standpoint.
Mike, this will be a referendum on home field advantage. We will see just how much the fans matter when you start talking about home field advantage in the playoffs. Only one team had it this year per conference. And when you start thinking about the Kansas City Chiefs, how they've relied on their fans so many times throughout the course of the years. And of course, we don't even have to talk about Lambeau Field and how much that fan base has helped them throughout the course of their time. So will the location be the number one issue, or will it be the fan base? We will see this upcoming week how those fan bases, or lack thereof, play a key role in how these playoff games unfold.
Real quickly, before we end it for this segment, be looking at the road teams, the Rams, the Ravens, the Browns, the Buccaneers. Any of those jump out at you to say, you know what, I got a good feeling. I think this team, given what you just said, the lack of crowds, potentially good weather, obviously New Orleans being the dome, but an empty dome. Any of those teams give you a feeling like, yeah, this might be a team to watch on the road this weekend in the divisional round?
Watch the Rams. Anytime you got Aaron Donald on your team, he is a monster. He is absolutely a game wrecker, and he could come in and really change what the Green Bay Packers want to do. And so if they can get anything from their offense, if they can get 10, maybe 14 points, that might be enough, because I think the Los Angeles Rams can have a defensive virtuoso against Aaron Rodgers and that offense.
Yeah, I'm looking at it too. And of the four, I'm also interested, does the Ravens behind Lamar Jackson, and I think, and taking nothing away from him either, but that defensive effort late in that game by the Ravens defense, that's the old adage, right? Defense wins championships. So I think the two games that are played on Saturday are the ones that got my attention from that standpoint. Of course, we'll break it down for you next week when we get together on Train and Grose. But we'll step aside here. On the other side, national champion crowned in college football last night. We'll talk about it.
Train and Grose.
Welcome back in, Train and Grose, a special Tuesday edition after the national championship game last night in Miami, and the Alabama Crimson Tide take care of business in a big way against the Ohio State Buckeyes. And B, you look at this, Ohio State stayed close early, but you could just see it happening. And it's almost like a slow motion car wreck, right? Every time you looked at it, it just felt like Alabama was inching it up. And then they just turned it on. And I hate to say it, I was going to say they rolled them, but that's the motto down there. They rolled Tide. They did. They made Ohio State look average late first quarter and certainly throughout the course of the second half.
Better players, better coaching. It was inevitable. And I look at Devontae Smith. They had no answers for Devontae Smith. They had no answer for Jones at quarterback. They had no answer for Najee Harris at the running back position. It was just too much. These guys won pretty much 90% of all the college awards that you could win this year, and it was rightfully so. When you watched them play, you saw two teams, one at a very high level and the other one is really good. They got as far as they could take it, but the road stopped right there. And you give Nick Saban a lot of credit. Now he's in a league all by himself, 7 national championships as a head coach, including the one at LSU. I don't think there's any debate that he is arguably the best college coach of all time. And I know that's saying a lot given the coach that was there at Alabama years before in Bear Bryant. But in every statistical category, he's outdone him now. And when you start just looking at it from a number standpoint, it really is no comparison. And the thing that's really scary about this, Mike, is I don't see this thing slowing down anytime soon, because you saw the backups come in and they look just as talented as the guys that were starting. So it's not as if they're going to rebuild. They really literally reload. And you look at the future for Alabama, I see them winning a few more championships before Nick Saban's done. But that game last night, Ohio State had to play perfect football in order to win that game, and they didn't play perfect. And once you saw that there was no there was no answer for Devontae Smith, it was game over.
Yeah, and to your point about Alabama, and I think you can make the larger point about the SEC, right? Since we went to the college football playoff scenario back in 2014, of course, Ohio State won the inaugural game. But since then, with the exception of the 2 Clemson wins, it's been SEC. And it's been mainly Alabama, right? You had LSU in there last year. But, this is looking like it's a concentration of power at the top. And we talked a lot on previous podcasts. You hear this conversation in talk radio, on TV about the Power 5. But, this is looking like more and more like this is just a concentration at the top. And, it's almost like Premier League soccer where you've got the relegation like the top, and the SEC is it. I mean, you look at this, to your point, I don't see it stopping anytime soon. And if it does stop, I don't look for it to stop outside the Alabama reign. I don't look for it to stop outside the SEC. It's somebody there is going to knock them off. It's, you saw, I mean, Ohio State was number 3 in the poll. I understand that, but that was the team that showed up to play Alabama. And it was close for a quarter, maybe a quarter and 5 minutes. And then that was it. And it was over.
The thing that I saw, Mike, was a team that was absolutely focused, that was absolutely locked in. And this is a team that had been steamrolling people all season long. This may go down as one of the most accomplished and best offensive teams that we've ever seen. This team averaged 49 points per game. They scored 52 in a championship game, Mike. You mean to tell me that the number 2 team in the country just had 52 put on them and it was a 28? They were 4 touchdowns better than the team that's number 2 in the country? That's alarming. And to think that now they're going to come back and basically going to be right where they were this year again. They just roll them in. I mean, you hate to use that cliche because, you don't want to get cornball, but it's almost as if it just keeps rolling along. Like it's a perfect phrase for this program. And Nick Saban has a good thing going. The thing that you see when you watch his teams play, they're disciplined, they're talented, and they like playing for Nick Saban. And when you have that combination, that is very difficult to break up. You're just going to see kids continue because they watched just like we did. You saw the center that had been lost for the season got to come in and take the last 2 snaps for his college career. You saw, how that same player picked Nick Saban up and carried him across the field. You don't do that for a coach that you just respect but don't like. They genuinely like Nick Saban, and I think he does for them what they need to get to the next level, and they in turn pay him back by going all out and rewarding him with championship after championship.
And it doesn't matter, you hear about programs and you say, well, the coordinators are a big part of what happens, right? And to me, the coordinators at Alabama, because Sarkisian moving on to Texas, it's almost like the players. Like if when Nick Saban identifies assistant coaches and puts them in coordinator roles, it's just they're filling in a part of the big machine just like players do. He probably goes out and recruits and has an idea. He's probably got a board of future coaches. If I lose this coach, here's who I want to replace him with. And it's just a big, it's like a well-run company right now. To your point, like, well-run company with a beloved CEO is what you've got in Alabama football right now. And, we talk about different programs and some of the struggles from these historical programs trying to keep up and catch up. And you just don't replicate that overnight. You don't fire a coach and say, okay, go beat Alabama. And that you hear that a lot in the SEC. Well, why did coach get fired at other SEC school? Well, because they lost to Alabama. Well, yeah. That's a long list.
Absolutely. And the thing, Mike, that's so impressive is that you look at the assistant coaches that leave, they've actually done pretty well. Kirby Smart a few years ago played Nick Saban in a national championship game. You look at Lane Kiffin and what he's been able to do. You look at all these other coaches around the college football landscape, and these are guys that have once upon a time all played underneath Nick Saban, and they've all had relative success. They haven't had the success that Nick Saban's had, but the fact that he's able to bring these coaches in, get them coached up first, and then they can get that information to the players, and then they move on to other programs and coach their players up. That just speaks to what's at the top, that strong leadership, And that's knowing exactly how to get this done. And I don't know. This thing isn't going to slow down anytime soon. So if you're not going to Alabama, you just have to wonder, you're basically just playing for an opportunity to get a look to get to the next level.
B, before we get out of here real quick, if you're a head coach or an athletic director of school, you putting Alabama on your non-conference schedule?
Yes, because you know you're going to get paid. You're going to take a beating, but you're going to get paid.
Right? Alabama kicks off the season. Hopefully, fingers crossed, we have a normal 2021 season. They kick off Labor Day weekend in Atlanta against the Hurricane. So we'll see how that goes. Miami and Alabama to kick off the season. But check this out. Everybody else taking your word of advice. Southern Miss, New Mexico State, and Mercer all rolling through Tuscaloosa to collect a check and an ass whooping from Crimson Tide. So take that. Like I don't
take that with you.
I hear you about the paycheck, man, but there's other places you can go and get paid. I might think twice if I'm in that situation, but we'll see. But like I said, fingers crossed we get to at least see some games like that in 2021. We'll step aside. One more segment to go here on Training Grose. Kind of a potpourri, a roundtable segment coming up. We want to talk a little bit more NFL, some coaches changes, and also we haven't touched on the Suns in a couple of weeks. And I want to talk about them as well. That's coming up. Next segment, Training Grose.
Train and Grose.
All right, final segment, Train and Grose, a special Tuesday edition of the podcast. We did it after the national championship game. And glad you could find us here. Thanks for finding us. And please subscribe and give us feedback. Love reading the comments from people that subscribe. Give us feedback on Twitter as well, at Train and Grose. All right, B, real quickly, roundtable topics here as we get ready to wrap it up this week. Interesting word coming yesterday. I don't know if it was surprising or not, but the Philadelphia Eagles joined the ranks of those teams in the NFL looking for a new head coach as they part ways 3 short years after winning the Super Bowl. They pull the plug and they're in the market for a new head coach.
I'm shocked by this one. I really felt like this was one of those locks that the coach would be back. The guy has a statue out in front of the stadium, for goodness sakes, and the statue hadn't been out there for very long because, as you just said, it was 3 short years ago that they won a Super Bowl and the first one in franchise history. And so this is a clear sign that they sided with Carson Wentz. And I'm not sure why you side with a Carson Wentz because the owner watched the same games that we watched. And we saw Carson Wentz really struggle at times where he shouldn't have struggled. And for a guy that has been a MVP candidate at some point in his career, he should not still be making some of these mistakes that he's making. He got legitimately beat out by Jalen Hurts for that starting quarterback position. But whatever conversation was had between he and Lurie, owner of the Eagles, it didn't go well. And they decided to part ways. And I hit the corny joke with you guys last night. I was like, he went down with the ship. And I think that was the sticking point. You can say that it was other personnel or maybe philosophical differences, but it really was about the quarterback. Lurie wanted to keep Carson Wentz, and Doug Pederson wanted to go in a different direction. And for that reason and that reason alone, with all the money that's locked up into Carson Wentz, it seemed as if they made the decision to go with the quarterback.
And that's interesting. And you wonder if you're a head coach, and I understand there's only 32 jobs. So if you get offered the job, you're going to take it. But you also have to go in with your eyes wide open and know and see what happened. We saw that the Eagles looked a lot better when they went with Jalen Hurts. We saw how Carson Wentz didn't, from my standpoint, didn't conduct himself. It wasn't a good look standing around making the comments that you made to the media after particularly in Philadelphia, where unlike some of the other places in the Western United States where the media isn't as focused on things like New York and Philly and maybe Washington, that Philly media is going to take something and churn it up. And even if it wasn't an innocent enough comment, you've got to be smart enough as the face of the franchise to understand the impact that that's going to have not only on yourself and how people look at you, but that locker room. We hear a lot of conversation. You were talking about it in our last segment about what it's like to be part of the Alabama Crimson Tide. And a lot of that is locker room culture. And that carries over into the National Football League. We've heard you talk about that before. So Carson Wentz can go ahead with the power play after the fact and have that conversation with the boss and tell him whatever he wants to say. But there's 52 other guys in the locker room. There's a couple other quarterbacks in the locker room. And the players saw what we saw in terms of who performed better on the field this year.
The only thing I'll say about this, Mike, to wrap it up, is good luck. You've made your bed with the quarterback, a guy that has shown that he has regressed as far as being a quarterback, and you fired a damn good coach to make your bed with him. So that's what you get, and whatever you get in the following years, it is what it is. The bigger point is, Mike, this will make now 15 head coaching hires in the last 2 years. So the fact that you've had basically half your league turn over their coaching staffs, because, you have to blow out the assistants just like you blow out the head coaches. There's no patience in the NFL anymore. When you start thinking about like some of these older coaches and how they got to greatness, the Tom Landrys back in the day, the Vince Lombardis, these guys didn't win in their first 2 or 3 years. It took years to build those names and build those reputations and build those cultures. And now you're having these teams now. It's where if you don't get that top quarterback and he doesn't get you to a Super Bowl within the first 2 or 3 years, then you're trying to restart and start over from scratch. I don't understand that. It's still the same formula for winning. I understand there's more attention now with social media and TV contracts and all this other type of stuff. But the formula for winning in the NFL has remained the same for the last 100 years, and it hasn't changed. And for these owners to all of a sudden think that they can reinvent the wheel, it's a dangerous precedent that they're setting.
Meanwhile, and we'll keep an eye on this. We've got a lot of openings, a lot of vacancies,
for sure.
And we'll talk about that in upcoming edition of Train and Grose. Real quickly, sure. We haven't talked about our Suns for a couple of weeks because we've been focused on the NFL. They lost in to me, ugly fashion. I mean, look, I get it. It's the NBA. You're on the road. You're going to have these. But to me, it's just really weird. Like, they go on this road trip and you look at it. It's a 3-game road trip. And I understand traveling in the age of COVID, it's not an easy thing, particularly with all the stories that are going on in the NBA. But the records are what they are. And you look at teams and you kind of get a sense, even in 2020, 2021 with the NBA, the good ones and the bad ones. So you got a 3-game road trip. You're at Detroit, at Indiana, at Washington. I looked at it and I said, worst case, you come out 2-1. The game I'm most concerned about is the Pacers. You look at them, they're at that next level in the East. They're not at the top, but they're in that 4 to 6 range as far as I'm concerned. And then Detroit and Washington, my goodness, you talk about bad basketball and long-suffering fans in those 2 cities. Detroit, I'm from Detroit. We've had our brushes with greatness in NBA history, but this certainly is not it. And the Suns lose those 2 games. And I think it shows a couple of things. As I said, the difficulty of just the travel and everything associated with that in 2021. But I think also shows, again, similar to what you were saying in the NFL, it takes a while to instill that full picture of winning and continuity. And I think, I'm going to say it, maturity, in a team. You just don't, there's only so many that make it to the NBA, and you can't just show up, roll the balls out, and assume you're going to win. With all that, I don't want to paint too negative of a picture, right? You're 7-4, you're still in the top 4 in the West, and it's not the end of it, but maybe signs of something to keep an eye on for the Suns team as we move forward.
I'm really impressed with the Suns. I know it was a bad road trip, but overall, looking at this team going into that road trip, I mean, they had one of the better records in the entire Western Conference, and you have to give a lot of credit to Chris Paul and Monty Williams and the leadership that both of those men have instilled with the rest of the team, and everybody has basically fallen in line, and I think everybody else has benefited from it. And the fact that this team is even relevant compared to what they were the last couple of years, I really think that unlike football, one person, whether a head coach or a key player, can really change life as far as what your outlook is for your team and how much success that you think that you're going to have. Because without Chris Paul, I don't think that this team looks the same. I don't think that they have the same expectations. And the fact that he's come in and already enhanced the overall win percentage and the overall attitude of the young stars, I just think that he has become an early season MVP candidate in the fact that he gets this team playing at a much different level with a much different energy. Not saying he's going to win it, but when you start talking about most valuable, you have to throw Chris Paul into that conversation right now.
I totally agree with that. You look at it, and I just bring it up only from the standpoint of it's part of that growing process. It's part of that, how do you go from where the Suns have been for the last decade to where everybody would like to see them again, which is competing year in and year out, at the top of the NBA's Western Conference. And lastly, B, before we get out of here, And we talk a lot about the NFL and giving them credit for getting through an entire football season without any cancellations. They had a few games they had to bump around and move around. We got some Wednesday and I think a Tuesday game. We had some weird days of football, but there were no games canceled the entire NFL season. The NBA is already here in early January dealing with a rash of cancellations, questioning people on the outside looking in, questioning some of the protocols that they've put in place because, again, the NFL, it didn't work perfectly, but they had very strict protocols and they held their people accountable. And at the end, they were putting them on blast publicly for anybody that violated, hitting them with some pretty heavy fines. And Adam Silver, and apparently Sean was telling us there's a meeting later on today where the NBA hierarchy is going to get together and figure this out. But Adam Silver, for me, look, he's done such a nice job, I think, as NBA commissioner, taking this game to the next level. But he's got his work cut out for him right now because they're right on the cusp of maybe losing a big chunk of the season, a la what they did a year ago, where they had to shut it down for 5-6 weeks in March before they restarted and bubbled them up down in Florida. Interesting couple of days here for the NBA hierarchy as they figure out how do they weather this and how do they make sure that they can put a product out there.
The funny thing is they've already conceded 10 games before the season even started. So you already came in with a shortened season. It was 72 instead of 82. So that it was already, okay, guys, we can't get through 82. We can get through 72, but not 82. But then the thing that's so disappointing is that you just saw the formula work the season before when you're in a bubble. Why would you think going outside of the bubble would get you the same type of results? It's too many moving parts. You're going from city to city on a regular basis, and you're getting exposure in all these different areas and all these different pockets. How did you think that this was going to turn out? I just wonder, with a league that had made so many strides in the right direction and had done so many things right the previous season in order to crown a champion, how you stumbled out of the gates and so blind to the obvious is that in order for this thing to work, you're going to have to concentrate it, and you can't allow these teams to go from city to city, state to state, and travel and not think that there's not going to be any type of repercussions for that.
It'll be interesting to see what comes out of these conversations today and this week, these meetings. And I think the first thing you look at is there any kind of, and I don't know if concession is the right word or acknowledgement, if the NBA goes the route of pausing the season, hey, we're going to shut it down for 10 days or 2 weeks, then I think you got problems. I think, then you really have to question whether or not, their plan as they have it laid out is feasible. And I agree with you, knowing what you knew after last season, you could have done some regional bubbles to kind of get games going, because the most important thing for the NBA right now is their TV contracts. Every time you cancel a game, you hurt your bottom line from a TV contract, because these arenas are not allowing fans in for the most part. And if they are, it's very few fans. So you're not making the money that you get from ticket revenue and concessions and all the normal things that you expect. So take care of your TV partners. I mean, I hate to say it like that. TV partners more important than anything else right now in professional sports. That's what the NFL did and what the NFL did so well. And the NBA's got to figure that out.
And Mike, one last thing before we get out of here. Stay tuned for the NFL Combine. That's going to be the next step in how this thing unfolds, because, the playoffs, they've got a system figured out pretty good, but how are they going to do that Combine with these young guys coming in, all trying to congregate in one area?
Yeah, no, it is. And the interesting thing will be, do you spend the money necessary to identify the players? Maybe you cut the list of players down, but spend the money, bring them in early and just lock them in. Because
regional combine,
but lock them in someplace, test them on the way in. Look, again, it's entertainment. You've talked about that. It's a business. It's entertainment. TV shows are getting produced. I saw an interview with Tyler Perry. He brings them in. He's got a hotel, and it's locked down. If you're on a Tyler Perry production, sports are entertainment. Entertainment or sports. Maybe follow that lead. That's going to do it for this edition of Train and Grose. Thanks for finding us again. Again, we love our subscribers. Leave us some feedback and tell your friends, and follow us on Twitter @Train and Grose. We'll see you next time.
I holla.